So I guess a little background of kind of why we developed this experience center is that, we have all of these different brands, right? So we deal in window treatments, we deal in lighting control, and home technologies like AV equipment and things like that. So we really wanted a space to show how all of these things work cohesively together and kind of create that environment that people are looking for. So that's really what this showroom is about. And if we could jump to the Zoom chat there, we could pull it up. And I kind of want to start with just a little tour of the showroom. So this is what we call our decorative gallery. And it's just full of kind of a different variety of decorative fixtures for whatever reason they have, some advanced LED technology in them, or they're just, have some really cool natural materials, things like that. Just a place to kind of inspire people. But behind that lab, you're going to see a little door behind Kate and Ashley there, and that is our architectural lighting lab. And that's developed to kind of show people the full spectrum of the LED market and really kind of educate people on why one fixture costs more than another one and kind of all the different trim options and things like that. So it's a really important space for us. But if we jump to the front-facing camera, you're going to see we have these big windows in the front, and that is our shading lab. And in the foreground, you're going to see a little living room display. And this living room display was created to have a really immersive experience for clients and kind of break down the different levels of LED technology and kind of what's out there. Lighting is one of those things where it's really hard to describe. It's kind of like describing like a smell or something like that, but it's really easy to show. So if we jump into demo mode here, you're going to kind of see the space transform a little bit. And this is where we kind of sit down with builders and architects and their clients and hash out what level of technology is right for the job. And our CEO likes to say that lighting is no longer a commodity, it's a specification. And that's because there's so many choices that need to be made before you even get to buy the fixture, right? And in this space, we start at the very beginning. So what's something that someone has to decide now that they didn't have to in the past? And that's the easiest of those questions is color temperature. So when we're talking about color temperature, it's important to put it into perspective for people, right? And what the industry has done is it's essentially standardized on two main color temperatures. What we're looking at now is 3,000 Kelvin, and that is meant to replicate a halogen light source. Now, if we jump to 2,700 Kelvin here, you're going to see the space warm up a little bit, right? And that is made to represent 2,700 Kelvin. And so those are the main choices, right? There's a bunch of different temperatures in between these two, but you can pretty much get a fixture in any one of these two color temperatures. It has nothing to do whether the house is traditional or modern or anything like that. It's totally personal preference. So it's a really important experience for people to see this color effect on a whole space, right? You're not just pointing a fixture at the wall and saying, which one do you like better, right? It's important to see how it affects the entire environment. Now, one thing that's different with LEDs that different than what we all grew up with is that if we go back to 3,000 Kelvin here, and then we dim it down. So we're going to dim this fixture down to 50%. What's interesting here is that the color temperature does not change, but the light output does. And that's very different than an incandescent light. And when you dim an incandescent light, not only does the light output lessen, but it warms in tone. And it creates this really kind of cozy feeling, right? And that's something that a traditional LED does not do, and that's different. And some people need to be aware of that, and it's fine for some clients, but other clients, that's not acceptable, right? So how can you change that? And one thing that you can do is you can use a tunable fixture. So this is kind of a step up from a basic LED. And what this is going to do is give you the ability to inject color into any output that you want. So as you can see here, this room will warm up in tone a little bit, right? Now there's different levels to this, right? The first most basic level is something called dim to warm. A lot of manufacturers provide this level of technology. They all call it something a little bit different, if it's like fade to warm or dim to warm or something like that, but it's just a buzzword to be on the lookout for. And basically what it means is that it replicates that incandescent experience. So it's a set curve, and as you dim down the fixture, a second set of LEDs pulls up those warmer tones. Now, that level of control for you guys doesn't mean anything special in terms of like wiring or infrastructure, right? But the step up from that is something called tunable white. And tunable white means you can control color temperature and light output independently. And for a lot of the fixtures on the market, that now means different infrastructure in the home, right? You're typically using 0 to 10 wiring as opposed to standard 2-wire Romex, right? And what does that mean for controlling the fixtures, right? So if you have a kitchen that has, let's say, 6 switch legs in it, which is typical, and you're using a tunable white fixture, those 6 dimmers on the wall now turn into 12 dimmers, right? And that's not really acceptable for a lot of residences. So, you know, is that a time to have a conversation about a control system, like a lighting control system? What does that mean for the rest of the infrastructure for the house? So these choices really have to be addressed before, you know, drywall goes up and gypsum goes up, right? Because this is going to affect the wires that need to be run. It's going to affect the devices that control all the fixtures. So some of these questions, you know, if someone finds out about this later in the game and they can't do it because the infrastructure of the house doesn't provide for it, that can be a bummer. So it's important to kind of hit these things head on in the design process. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here is kind of put these color temperatures into a little bit more of a perspective. So the fixtures that we have in this display are networked, and they're kind of the highest end fixtures, and they can do everything on the market. So the reason we use this is it allows us to show all the different levels, right? And what this fixture can do is actually it geolocates you. So it takes into account longitude and latitude, and it adjusts to the color temperature of the sun. So as we, you know, think about what the sun does every day, it starts in the morning really warm, and then in the afternoon it gets these really energized color temperatures, and then in the evening it warms up again, right? And this is what people are talking about when they're talking about circadian rhythm and human-centric lighting and things like that. So what you're going to see here is a little 30-second show of what the sun has done in Boston and what it will do in Boston later today. And, you know, this has been proven to affect metabolism and mood and energy levels and all of these different physiological aspects of the human condition. But, you know, what we're really talking about with clients is how it makes the room feel and how it makes the space look, right? So an example of why you might want to use something like this is if, you know, you have a brownstone and you have 2 windows on either side, and you have complete manufactured light on the interior of the space. So if you're walking around the interior of the space and you go to the exterior facing room with windows and natural light coming in, that space is going to feel very different, right? So this is a great technology to kind of pull that natural light into the space and have it throughout the whole residence. But what you see here is you see, you know, our shades came up, we have natural light coming in through our windows, and we're back at 3,000 Kelvin. Now, if we switch this to natural daylight, you're going to see that space transform a little bit and become a lot more uniform, right? And that's really important because it's in line with what's going on outside. And at some point in the day, the sun is in fact 3,000 Kelvin, right? So that initial scene that we just saw would look really normal. But like if we switch to 2,700 Kelvin now, you're going to see those differences.
Are you guys picking up the subtle difference a little bit? It's hard to do on the video, but these cameras, they actually worked hard to get these cameras to try to pick that up for the remote demo. But if you're standing in that room, the first time I saw it, and I saw the non-outdoor light in the space, open the shades, and then they tune the room to the outdoor. It's a physical feeling. Like the light just comes in, and it's a relaxing feeling. And that's where the demo is pretty powerful. It's good here. But you are picking it up. That's great.
Yeah, I would equate it to like when you go see a movie and then you walk outside and like you feel that sunlight on you. It just feels nice, right? Like that's what this technology gives you. And just to show you again, if we switch to 3,000 Kelvin, right? It's a really powerful change on the space. And you know, what these fixtures can also do is something that you guys have probably heard of called RGB, so red, green, blue, and that is the ability to change color. So Kate, if you could put us back in demo mode and go to the living room. Now, color is, something that's not necessarily for everyday use, but we've included it in this presentation for a very specific reason. So if we shift through some colors here, we're going to end on a very specific scene. And the reason this scene is important is because these fixtures are networked, right? They operate through radio frequency control. We actually have individual control over every single fixture. These are all run together on one run of Romex, so it's less wiring, right? It's no proprietary programming because we're using a specific control system, but it allows us to create this hybrid scene, right? So the food on the table still looks appetizing. The artwork still looks like it should. But you can still tell that there's something special going on. Now, the ability to change color with LEDs has been around for a long time, right? But historically, if I wanted to be able to change color temperature, light output level, color, I would need to run 8 wires to every single one of these fixtures and then run them back to like a DMX control board that you see when you go to a play. And then when someone has a dinner party and they want to use their color changing lights, they have to hire a DJ to come out and put in proprietary programming to do what they want to do. And we used to do that, but that's not something that we have to do anymore, right? Because we're using, a fixture that's in line with a control system. So, all of these different levels of technology are great, but they're not great if it's not easy to use, right? It's not great if it can't be implemented into the house easily. So what I'm going to show you here is a little example of what a lighting control interface might look like. And basically what we've done here is we've segmented out our showroom, which you can imagine would be like different rooms in your house. And if we click on the living room, and you go in, you can see how we have digital keypads, and in our physical space, we actually have keypads on the wall. So a lot of time what happens is we're having everyday use items on the wall, like, all off by the garage and things like that. But we have digital keypads that are stored for special occasions. So like we had a client that really liked, he wanted to throw this crazy Halloween party every year. And he only used that button for his Halloween party, right? So that just lives digitally. He doesn't have to interact with it every day at all, but it's there for when he wants it. So that kind of shows how you can really streamline, ease of use with something like this. And if we want to go to the gallery, we could kind of just cycle through some scenes here and show the difference between like 2700 Kelvin maybe. Our whole showroom is tied into this system, and it's a really good example of how easy and flexible it actually makes a lighting design and a lighting control design. And these are things that we walk through with clients, right? Because it's pretty powerful to see, how light deployed properly can really affect a space and change a space. And what we've been talking about so far is manufactured light and artificial light, right? But when we're talking about lighting design, we talk in layers. And the 4 layers are natural light, ambient light, so you can get from one side of the room to the other, task lighting, so things like under cabinet light or pin spots, something for a specific purpose, and then decorative lighting, which is that layer on top, which isn't necessarily for a specific purpose other than to just look good, right? But it's important to take into account how natural light plays into the situation and what are the tools you can use to mitigate natural light in a space. So if we could jump back to the PowerPoint.
Before we jump off this, a couple quick questions. So you show clients a range of fixtures, and if we use the good, better, best, how would you describe the good fixture? Is that the pick one fixed color and is warm the better and tunable the best? Walk me through those 3 good, better, best options.
Yeah, a basic LED fixture, a good fixture doesn't have to be expensive, but it does have to have a good quality of light, so a high CRI. So basically what CRI means is how well the fixture renders color. I'm sure you guys have seen like a compact fluorescent bulb, and when you walk into a room lit with that, Reds don't look red, they look gray. It's hard to tell the difference between red and green, things like that. So it's important to pick a fixture that has a really high CRI value, regardless of whether you're getting it at Home Depot or it's specified by the architect or whatever it is. It's a really important spec to pay attention to.
Is that your good? Just
that's
getting
good.
A good starting point?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Just good quality light. Better is some form of adjustability, whether it's dim to warm or tunable white. You still get high CRI values is something that you really want to look for. And then best is a fixture like this where you get a full range of tunability and there's some network control involved with it.
And these are all custom builders, so they're dealing with high net worth folks. Roughly, price for a good fixture, price for a better fixture, price for the best fixture, roughly.
Yeah, I would say a good fixture, you're probably looking at $150.
Okay.
A mid-range fixture, you're going to be in the $250, $300 range. And then a high-end fixture, you're probably not going to find one for less than $400.
Okay.
And it's probably
goes up to?
Yeah, it's probably going to top out at like $1,200.
Okay. And those retail prices?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. All
Yep.
right.
Sure.
Excuse me, you said it's a can line, right?
These are all architectural fixtures we're talking about, yeah.
Yeah. A architectural recess light. So if we could switch to the PowerPoint, we're going to talk about natural light for a second. And the easiest way to deal with natural light is window treatments, right? What are the characteristics of window treatments that you need to look out for? Well, the big main categories are solar, privacy, room darkening and blackout, and decorative. And if I break those down, we talk about solar shades first because those are the shades that we see in the majority of the residents, right? So there's opacity to it. You can see through it. It does let some light in. Most residential spaces in terms of opacity are 1 to 5%, meaning the tightest opacity, 1%, lets 1% of light through it. Opacity is one of the main questions someone has to address. The second question is color. So what does color actually mean? Besides personal preference, and I just like a lighter colored shade or I like a darker colored shade, it actually does something for the space. And a lighter colored shade is going to reflect light and provide more privacy, right? Where a darker colored shade is going to absorb that light and give you a better view. So a lot of times in urban areas, we're using lighter colored shades because people need that privacy element. And a lot of times in more urban areas, we're using a darker colored shade because you want to preserve that view and still maintain some protection of the finishes in your house. Privacy shade. So a privacy shade is described as less than 1%. So this is letting less than 1% of light through. It's strictly designed for privacy. It's nice because it does still glow, right? So it's not like a room darkening or a blackout shade. We see this a lot on the first floor in urban areas. We see this a lot in bathrooms. It's a pretty good tool to not make the room feel like you're kind of shutting out the world, but you're still getting a lot of privacy. And then we have room darkening. So I'm very careful when I describe a room darkening shade. A lot of people, when you say blackout shade, this is what they're talking about. However, this shade is not, although the fabric is not letting light in, when the shade is shut, you still get light channels on the side, right? So if someone says blackout, it's like, what do they really mean? Do they want just a shade that doesn't let any light through, or do they just want, something like this? So we describe this, completely opaque fabric as room darkening. Full blackout lives in side channels, right? So that's a conversation that also has to happen early on in the design process because these side channels a lot of times are architectural, right? They can be surface mounted, but most people prefer that they're recessed into a jamb so they don't have to look at them. But that is going to completely block out any light at all from coming into a room. And we see this a lot in primary bedrooms. We see this a lot in media rooms, spaces like that. And then we get to decorative. So when I talk about decorative shades, it's less about managing natural light and more about raising the level of decor in a space. A lot of times these are designer fabrics. a lot of times they're hand woven. They come at a high price point, right? Most of the time they're natural materials, so they tend to break down a little bit faster than a traditional kind of more utilitarian solar or sheer shade. But it's a high-end item, and a lot of people are really looking for that level of finish in certain spaces of their house. You can have motorized Roman shades, as we just saw. You can do roller shades, drapery tracks, all things like that. So it's really important to kind of hash out what those items are, because they all do have spatial requirements and power requirements and things like that. And that kind of leads me to tying this stuff all together. So, we've talked a lot about lighting, talked a little bit about shading, but this kind of process goes for all of the technology subsystems in a home. And, this is a process that we've broken out because it's in line with, the rest of the build process. And it really starts with a client interview and an education, just like, what have you lived with before, that type of deal. What are you looking to accomplish? What are your expectations? Things like that. We go into program development, which is essentially scope and budget development. Design development, which is a little bit more detail, and then construction drawings. So, we use a proprietary software for scope and budget development, but it's, at this level in the process, it's really just trying to figure out, what goes where and what's the budget, right? So these is just a schematic sketch, typically a PDF, with simple icons just outlining different components in a system, right? And a lot of times this is including shades, access control, audio, video, lighting control. It's important to have a really easy way to kind of manipulate that scope and custom tune it to that person's budget. And the next step up from that is a design development package. And this is, a level up of detail, right? You get shade schedules, you get lighting schedules, you get power and signal requirements, and this is all stuff that you guys should look for at this stage in the process, right? You get corresponding CAD level drawings, nothing's dimensioned. Technically, you could kind of build from this, right? Because you know what wires go where, what signal requirements things have, stuff like that. And then the next level up is finished level construction drawings, right? You should have section details and elevations and fully dimensioned plans for where all the lights go, where all the recessed lights go, everything like that. And that takes you, head-end equipment is really important. A lot of electricians have certainly worked with, the majority of the lighting control systems out there, right? But that head-end is really important space. What are the BTU calculations, right? What else is going in there? Working with the MEP guys to figure out if all of this stuff will be functional in the space. So these are really important drawings for the process. Just some use cases. We see some surface-mounted shades up there, which is a new product that's hitting the market. An example of a lighting control keypad. It's a nice house in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Buzzwords to look out for. So lighting, lumen output. How much light is the fixture actually producing? Color temperature. What does the client prefer? Color rendering index. Are the suggested fixtures, do they actually render color to make it look as realistic as possible? Dim to warm. Is there some sort of tunability with that fixture? What is that? That's a really important one to pay attention to. That's when someone says tunable lighting, it's like, let's look at the spec sheet and see the wiring requirements for this fixture, right? And what does that mean for the rest of the infrastructure for the house? And that goes for tunable light too. Those last two are really important buzzwords to pay attention to. And then shading. So what do we have here? Solar and sheer, privacy, room darkening, just kind of the main different types of shades. Side channels. Shade pockets is a huge one. Where do the rollers and motors for these shades live? Are they surface mounted? Are they recessed into the ceiling? Is this component provided by the shade manufacturer? Is this something that you guys have to coordinate and build? So we have pocket conversations all the time, every day, and it's those section details really come in handy when figuring out how these things actually live in a building. And that's what we have.
Can we go back to the showroom? You know what I'm going to ask you.
Oh, you want to see? Yes.
So there's a feature of the tunable lighting that we'll try to show you here, and it's really valuable for clients that have art that they want to feature or other features in the house that they want to highlight. And you will see, if you pay attention, you will see it here. And don't want to put you on the spot, but let's see if we can get that to come across. Explain what it does.
So this is basically, I describe it as an Instagram filter for your house. And essentially what this fixture can do is you can manipulate the wavelength of light that it emits to exaggerate certain colors and tones. So if you look at the oranges, if you could turn it off, Kate, and then turn it back on, you're going to see that orange gets exaggerated. And you can also see that the color of the bowl does not change, right? So it's not a filter or a lens that's going over the fixture. It's actually like a manipulation of the recipe that creates the light.
So what are you injecting? You're injecting different colors into the white to make the orange pop out?
Yeah.
Do it a couple other times. I'd make sure to see if we can see the nuance. When you're standing in front of it, can you guys make out the change in the orange?
So an example of why we use this in the real world is art, right? A lot of our clients all have really intensive art collections. And with this fixture, we can pull out certain tones in the architecture or the artwork to their specifications. Like say they want this picture to be a little bit more blue, we can make it a little bit more blue. Things like that. Another cool use case is we can match the conditions that the artwork was worked on. So like say someone has an oil painting and it was painted by candlelight, right? We can replicate that candlelight and preserve that artist's perspective. And when you have a really significant art collection, lighting it is a really big deal. And this ability to kind of fine tune that is huge and a big selling point for a lot of people.
So talk a little bit about how this system is wired, the sort of daisy chain Romex for one, and just so they understand that part of it.
Yeah, no, that's an important characteristic. So basically the way this particular fixture works is that it's all daisy chained together and it has a direct feed to the circuit breaker. So there's no dimmer or switch in between this fixture and the power source. And you can actually put up to like 50 of these on one 20 amp circuit, which is pretty wild. I mean, it's the same circuit that you use to charge your phone is the same thing that can light almost 50 fixtures in your home. And that's due to the low energy usage of the LEDs. But it's, one, it's cool because it saves in wiring labor. Two, it's nice because it's just, you don't have to worry about control devices in between the fixture and making sure that it's an ELV dimmer or an MLV dimmer or anything like that. But it's really important because it works so tightly with the lighting control system. And it's really important to kind of hash out and have a Rolodex of control systems that work with the fixtures that you like to use. The industry hasn't really standardized on, dimming protocols with fixtures. So say, for example, you have 4 recessed lights and they work on a dimmer. And then you have another circuit in a house that only has one of those recessed lights and you use the same dimmer, it might not work, right? So, there's no real resource to go check that out and say, does this light work with this fixture? Or does this light work with this dimmer? You can call the company that makes a dimmer and they're gonna go, well, why don't you call the lighting company? And then they're gonna say, well, why don't you call the dimmer company? So it's really important to have real world use cases of this stuff working together. And that's something that, at this point in time really just comes with experience.
Talk about the controllability of the lamps and how it relates to like saturation of the artwork. So you've got two different pieces of art on the wall. One has a blue, sort of essence, and the other is orange. And then you want to create the temperature, the color of the light in the space itself, right? So how do you manage? You got 6-8 fixtures up there. You want to have three different things happen. You want to have either a variable color of light in the room, plus you want to saturate those paintings. And how do you control that?
So I think there's a couple of different aspects to that. One is the fixture that you use to do it. Is it a wall washer? Is it designed specifically for artwork? Is it an adjustable fixture? So it could be a downlight, or you could point it at the wall if you want it to. So a lot of it, with the majority of the lighting market, depends on how the fixtures are circuited together, right? And it's something that you want to think about beforehand. And then, when I'm walking through a space with a client, it's always, let's light the walls. From a lighting design perspective, what we see a lot in bedrooms, for example, is what I call 4 cans and a fan, right? So it's 4 downlights and a fan with a light kit in the middle. And that lights the room sufficiently to do what you need to do in it. But if you simply just point those recessed lights at the wall instead of the floor, that room is going to feel a lot more full of light, and it's going to be a lot more comfortable to be in. You're going to have less glare from the recessed light fixtures, and it just makes the room feel more comfortable. So, when you're walking through a space or thinking about a lighting design, and you look at it on plan, and you're going to see, 99% of the time, it's just a really symmetrical grid on the ceiling, right? But what you really want to do is you want to fine tune that to the space, and you really want to light the walls more so than the floor in a lot of instances. And when we're talking about things like artwork, it's like, where is that artwork going? And let's, maybe circuit these fixtures separately so you can kind of have that adjustability in the space. In terms of color temperature, besides having that specific like art gallery scenario where you're fine-tuning it to the artwork, a lot of it is about consistency, right? So one is the goal is to have the same color temperature as the sun. That's going to make the space feel the most comfortable. And two is, is your under cabinet lighting the same color temperature as your recessed lighting? Is your recessed lighting a different color temperature than your decorative lighting? So it's all about trying to match that stuff up as much as possible to kind of create that cohesive environment. And another thing to that point too is it's important to find a manufacturer that has different levels of fixture, so like that good, better, best. Because a lot of times what happens is when you have, we talk about front of the house, back of the house, right? Like you might not have the same grade fixture in the kitchen that you do in a secondary bedroom, right? You don't necessarily have to use the same recessed light throughout the whole house. And when you step down in that price point for those secondary spaces and you use a different manufacturer, a lot of times those color temperatures aren't going to match with the rest of the house, right? Even though they both say 2700 Kelvin, there's no like authority that's going around and making sure that they're both the same 2700 Kelvin.
So you don't have to put the $800 fixtures throughout the whole house. You can do those in the key areas.
Right.
And put less expensive fixtures, hallways, bedrooms, things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, well, anything else that we wanted to cover here today? We have some time. I don't know if anyone has some questions or you get some time back for yourself. Are you all, from a builder standpoint, I don't know if you get involved in bringing this up, but I think like we've talked about and probably beaten the horse to death here is the wiring and the shade pockets and channels for blackout shades. All of those things provide a lot of value to the homeowner, and bringing it up as a builder, if it hasn't been discussed, I think helps you build credibility with the client and opens them up to some new things. Greg, do you have a question?
So is the controllability hardwired or wired?
Typically, it's a mixture of both. A lot of systems are wired. I mean, the industry has kind of chosen 3 or 4 main paths. You hear about Zigbee, You hear about Wi-Fi, you hear about radio frequency, and then the hardwired. What we've found is that radio frequency and hybrid systems are the most reliable. So a lot of times what we're doing is we're using what we would call a hybrid. So it's a mixture of essentially like a smart circuit breaker, right? And then low voltage keypads placed around. And then we also combine that with radio frequency dimmers and switches. So like when we deploy a lighting control system, one of the big factors is, yes, where are the devices going to live, right? And where's that head-end component going to live? But it's also about ease of use, right? And so if you walk into a powder room or something like that, everybody's used to a dimmer-dimmer switch, right? You have a light over the vanity, you have a recessed light, you have a fan. And so, having 3 control devices on the wall is not confusing in that instance, and most people are used to that, right? So it's all about kind of using keypads in areas where, you have over like 4 loads or something like that to kind of cut down on and make it, more easily usable. But it's really about deploying the system in a way where you can walk through the space and it feels natural and comfortable.
On this BEST system, it is wireless, correct?
It's a hybrid system, so it consists of a panel and then
Right. Yeah.
the dimmers and switches are radio frequency based.
But the control, like the signal that's sent to the light fixture to give each fixture individual control.
With this, yeah, it is networked,
Yeah.
so it's radio frequency.
And so it's an important point because in the previous way or more rigid way to do lighting design, you end up with having to say these light fixtures, these 3 are going to be controlled by this dimmer, and these 4 are going to be controlled by this dimmer. This gives you unlimited flexibility to combine different lights, raise and lower the color or the dimness, the brightness, and adjust the color of each individual fixture. So you have a much greater lighting design once the fixtures are installed, and how you edit it as well.
Right. I mean, the general trend in the industry is flexibility, right? I mean, the recessed lights are mudded into the ceiling, right? And they're not easily changeable. So having a fixture that gives you more flexibility, a lot of times is going to make the cost jump up, but it's going to have to make the client or the homeowner make less choices in the beginning, right? And so that's where that kind of value proposition is. If they don't want to answer whether or not it's 2,700 or 3,000 Kelvin and they can't decide, well, it's maybe a good idea to suggest a fixture that can do both.
On a hybrid system, I know what happens when the power goes out. That's the stupid question. But when the network's down in the hybrid system, you're still functional?
Yeah, so the way this particular system works is it's not, when we say networked, it creates its own network. So it's not using your Wi-Fi, right? It's creating its own radio frequency network. If that was to go down, there's still the hardwired connection with the low voltage keypads, and then the dimmers and switches are literally hardwired like a traditional dimmer and switch, so they still function.
Yeah, sure.
Share if you don't mind, the brand of the recess light that you're using there.
Yeah, so that's a company called Ketra, Ketra.
Yeah. So I know a couple years ago, the availability of bulbs for the decorative fixtures was not fully available, so that you couldn't have the exact same bulb and controllability with your decorative fixtures. Is that evolving?
Slowly but surely. They do have retrofit bulbs, so if you have a client that's doing a retrofit situation and you want to screw in some PAR lamps, you can do that. They come in a much lower price point. It's about $200 per bulb. But in terms of like MR16 and really small, GU10 bulbs and things like that you see in a lot of decorative fixtures, they're just the form factor is so small that the technology isn't there. And that's something that I do talk about with people. You got to be really open about that, because if you have this giant chandelier in the middle of your dining room and all of your lights are a certain color temperature and that chandelier is a different one, it's going to be really obvious and apparent in the space. So, you know, you have to make that clear up front, or you suggest a fixture with like a drum shade or something like that, or shades that actually hide the light source, so you can use retrofit bulbs.
And when are there any other gotcha? So a builder, if a builder gets involved on the architectural side, they're going to be dealing with, you know, connected to the architectural fixtures and the control system. If the designer comes in with decorative fixtures, what are the things to look out for from a control standpoint? So the color is one, right? You might have a bulb that doesn't match what your tunable bulb can do. Any other control gotchas to be aware of so that at the end result doesn't have flickers or something confusing from a control standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times that just goes back to wiring, right? So the decorative selection process usually comes a lot farther along than the architectural selection process. So a big part of it is just making sure you know where decorative fixtures might go. And just like LED recessed lights, even if a decorative fixture is an incandescent light source, there might be different dimming protocols and requirements that are needed. So, you know, a good idea is maybe just run 0 to 10 wire to a decorative location, and then if you only use 2 wires, you only use 2 wires, right? So there's kind of little tricks like that where you can kind of prepare.
Okay. But it's wise to connect whomever is putting in the control system at the decorative phase to avoid any issues.
100%, yeah. Whoever is doing that control system needs a full fixture spec package to be able to do what they need to do.
All right. Any other questions? Sure. Thanks, Greg.
Brings up a really good question. Sorry. Really good question when you're working with interior designers and their lighting package, and then you're working with the owner on this circadian rhythm package for the architectural. How do you resolve the two, and what do you tell the interior designer to absolutely not do?
I don't think, as long as everybody's aware of what that end result is going to look like, you know, it's pretty wide open. The problem is when you get that surprise at the end where it's like, oh, this doesn't do that, like that's an important thing to avoid. But, you know, interior designers are going to pick what they want to pick, right? And, you know, you just have to be upfront and say that, you know, listen, you know, this is really cool looking and it's going to look great in the space, but it's not going to do this. So I just want you to know that, right? Because
can the architectural light be, I guess, emphasize enough of the change of color throughout the day where the decorative fixture, it doesn't really impact that? You still get the circadian rhythm and that change of color?
Yeah, and a lot of times, you know, your dining room chandelier isn't on during the day, right? Most of the time it's on when you're having a dinner party. And in that case, you can, if you have tunable lighting, you can certainly match the color temperature of that fixture.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
This is really awesome. This has me jazzed up about light. Your presentation was phenomenal, really.
Thank you.
I think it really highlights what you're trying to get across. My question is, as technology advances, things get smaller and smaller, right? And more powerful. It seems a little bit counterintuitive to me that this hasn't evolved to the point where it can all be controlled via this with a retrofit type of fixture. Do you have any visibility to when that's going to happen? There's still a pretty massive barrier to entry to this kind of technology, and that can't possibly continue forever, right?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, most people don't walk around their house and control it from their phone. Most people like wall controls and things like that, especially for like guests and things like that. But I mean, with retrofit systems, you can certainly tie in, for the most part, any home into a control system and operate that through your phone.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been doing this for 20 years, and early on, lighting control and the keypads and the switches, I've seen it where it was overkill and underkill. And you always want to make sure you know who the users are in the house, and and the range of users are the one-time users, the daily users, and the power users. The one-time user is the babysitter, your mother-in-law, parents who come over and visit, maybe a cleaner. Daily users are the family members, and the power user is the person who wants to maybe tweak scenes and do things like that. You got to think about the one-time user. That person in a pinch, babysitter hears a noise, they want to get a light on. They're not fumbling for an app they're not familiar with. They want to go to the wall, they want to push a button, they want to get a light on. Same thing for climate. You can hide thermostats and only have it on the app, and someone's going to say, I'm not comfortable, I don't have the app, what do I do? So I think there's a control methodology that I know these guys do, and we preach to integrators across the lives. On the retrofit part, there are bulbs. Philips Hue is one, right? It's lower price, it's more broad market. You can control it from the app. You can also put wireless switches in. The quality of light is not quite there. So, and some of the capabilities are not quite there, but it is coming. It's there today. Retrofitting without control, a lot of the technology to control it is in the bulb itself. And if you turn the power off to that circuit, now that bulb, you can't control it, right? So you have to be able to either keep constant power to the bulb so that so it's always listening for a command, or you need to get a lighting control switch with the bulb working together in some way so you don't kill power to the thing that's actually controlling, turning the bulb on, off, and dimming it, things like that.
Yeah, and I think that also gets to kind of how they actually are controlled. Like, there's a lot of retrofit situations where you can have, like, even for, like, an old 6-inch can, right? You can have a trim kit where you just essentially screw the power source in like a socket, and then you now have an LED trim and fixture at the bottom that has tunable light and has RGB. It has all of these things. But a lot of products like that are utilizing methods of control like Wi-Fi and Zigbee and things like that, which we found just aren't as reliable as a radio frequency or hardwired system.
There was an interesting product that hit the market 10 years ago, and it was a light source and a speaker that threaded into a recessed can. And everyone thought it was pretty cool. It was a pretty functional product. It didn't take off because of that power issue. You turn that switch off, you can't control it. So it's sort of like a two-step thing, and it was clumsy enough that it really didn't take off the way I think some thought. So, any other questions? All right, first of all, thank you, System 7. Ashley, Kate, you still out there? Give a wave, we gotta get you on that camera. All right, thanks guys, appreciate it. Andrew, thank you, appreciate everybody.